The night started like many others at the small roadside diner. The lights buzzed softly, the floor smelled faintly of cleaner, and the clock above the counter moved slower than it should. The young black waitress tied her apron, took a breath, and reminded herself to stay calm. It had been a long day, and her feet already hurt, but she needed the hours. She always did her job the same way. Polite voice, steady hands, and a quiet smile, even when customers were rude. The diner was not busy, just a few people finishing late meals. A truck driver stirred his coffee near the window. A couple shared fries in the corner. The waitress moved between tables, wiping counters and refilling cups. She liked the quiet moments because they gave her time to think. She thought about paying rent, helping her younger sibling with school supplies, and saving a little money each week. Life was not easy, but she believed hard work mattered. The bell above the door rang, sharp and loud. A woman walked in with fast steps and a hard face. She looked around as if the place already disappointed her. Behind her came another person, bigger, louder, and full of restless energy. The waitress noticed the change in the room right away. Some people bring calm with them, others bring storms. The woman sat without waiting to be guided. She dropped into a booth and sighed loudly. The waitress approached with a menu and a friendly greeting. Her voice was soft and respectful, the same tone she used with everyone. The woman did not look up. She waved a hand as if brushing away dust. From the start, it was clear she wanted control. The waitress waited a moment, then asked if they would like drinks. The woman snapped that the service was slow, even though only seconds had passed. The waitress apologized and wrote down the order carefully. She kept her eyes steady and her hands still. She had learned that calm often protected her. When the drinks arrived, the woman complained again. The ice was wrong. The cup was wrong. The waitress listened, nodded, and offered to fix it. The woman's voice grew louder. Heads turned. The person sitting with her laughed and added comments meant to sting. The waitress felt the familiar heat rise in her chest, but she swallowed it down. She reminded herself that the shift would end soon. She could endure a little more. She had endured much worse before. As the orders continued, the woman found new reasons to be upset. The menu was boring. The table was sticky. The waitress stood there, apologizing again, even though none of it was her fault. She wiped the table twice and offered another menu. Still, the woman was not satisfied. The tone changed when the woman leaned forward and lowered her voice, making it sharper instead of quieter. She said something cruel about how the waitress spoke. Then she said something worse about how she looked. The words were not shouted, but they cut deeper because they were meant to. The waitress felt her hands shake for just a second. She pressed her pen harder against the paper and focused on breathing. She did not answer back. She knew arguing would only make things worse. She stepped away to give them space, hoping the moment would pass. It did not. The woman stood up suddenly, her chair scraping the floor. She pointed across the diner and accused the waitress of disrespect. Her voice rose, filling the room. People stopped eating. The waitress turned slowly, heart pounding. She tried to explain, using simple words, saying she meant no harm. Her voice stayed calm, but inside she felt small and exposed. The woman was not listening. She wanted a scene. She wanted power. She turned to the person with her and said something that made the air feel heavy. The words were not shouted, but everyone close enough understood the meaning. It was an order meant to scare, meant to hurt. The waitress froze. Time seemed to slow, like the room was holding its breath. The person who had been laughing earlier stood up. The movement was sudden and threatening. The waitress took a step back, her heel catching slightly on the floor mat. She did not scream. She did not run. She stood there, eyes wide but steady, trying to understand how things had gone so wrong so fast. Around them, silence spread. The truck driver by the window lowered his cup. The couple in the corner stopped talking. No one knew what to do. Fear has a way of making people still. The waitress thought of her family. She thought of how hard she worked to avoid trouble. She wondered if anyone would step in. She also knew that sometimes help comes late or not at all. Before anything else could happen, A deep sound rolled through the night outside. It was distant at first, like thunder far away. Then it grew louder. The sound did not belong to the diner. Came from the road. The waitress felt it before she understood it. A low vibration under her feet. A growing roar that made the windows hum. The woman stopped talking mid-sentence. The person standing near the waitress turned toward the door, confused. The sound came closer, steady and powerful. One engine, then another, then many more. The parking lot lights flickered as shadows moved past the windows. The roar filled the space between breaths. The waitress glanced toward the door. She did not know what was coming, only that the moment had shifted. Something outside was changing the balance in the room. The bell above the door rang again, and again, and again. Heavy boots stepped onto the diner floor. Jackets with worn patches and road dust filled the doorway. The smell of fuel and night air rushed in. The newcomers moved calmly, not rushing, not loud. They carried themselves with a quiet confidence that made the room feel smaller. No one spoke at first. The engines outside slowly faded as they were turned off, one by one. The silence that followed felt different from before. It was not fear alone. It was attention. The waitress stood still, unsure what to do. She had seen groups like this on the highway before, but never this close, never at a moment like this. She did not know their names or their stories. She only knew the energy had changed. The woman's face lost its color. The confidence she had shown moments earlier cracked. Her mouth opened as if to speak, then closed again. She glanced around, suddenly aware of everyone watching. The person who had stood to threaten the waitress slowly sat back down. The movement was small but clear. The power in the room was no longer his. The newcomers took seats at a table near the counter. One of them nodded toward the waitress, not smiling, not frowning. Just a simple nod, like saying, "We see you." The waitress felt her shoulders loosen just a little. She did not feel safe yet, but she felt less alone. She picked up a menu with hands that were still shaking and walked toward the table, doing what she always did, her job. Behind her, the woman sank back into her seat, eyes darting, breath shallow. The storm she brought with her was no longer hers to control. Outside, the night settled, waiting. Inside, everything was about to change. The room stayed quiet for several long seconds after the newcomers took their seats. The waitress stood near the counter, holding a menu, unsure if her legs would listen to her. She could feel her heartbeat in her ears. She reminded herself to breathe slowly, the way she always did when nerves tried to take over. Work first, feelings later. She walked toward the table with careful steps. Her voice came out steady, though it took effort. She greeted them the same way she greeted everyone. Simple words, respectful tone. No fear in her voice, even if it still lived in her chest. The group responded calmly. One asked for coffee. Another asked for water. Nothing more. No raised voices. No demands. Just ordinary requests that felt strangely grounding. The waitress nodded and wrote everything down, grateful for the normal moment. Behind her, the woman who had caused the trouble sat stiff in her booth. She watched every movement now, her earlier loud confidence gone. She whispered to the person beside her, but the words were tight and nervous. Her eyes kept sliding toward the jackets and boots, then back to the waitress. The waitress filled mugs at the counter. Her hands still shook a little, but she focused on the sound of liquid pouring, the warmth of the cups. These small tasks helped her feel real again. She placed the drinks on a tray and carried them back, step by step. As she set the cups down, she noticed something she had not seen before. The group was watching the room, not just their table. Their attention was calm but sharp. They had noticed the tension. They had noticed her. She returned to the counter, her back straight. The manager stood near the register, face pale. He leaned toward her and whispered if she was okay. She nodded. She did not trust her voice just yet. The woman suddenly cleared her throat loudly. It was an awkward sound, meant to pull attention back to her. She waved the waitress over with a stiff hand. The waitress hesitated for a moment, then walked over. Running would only make things worse. The woman complained again, but her words were weaker now. She said the service had been rude. She said she wanted the manager. The waitress listened, eyes level, hands folded in front of her. She did not argue. She simply said she would get him. The manager approached the table, trying to keep his voice calm. He asked what the problem was. The woman spoke fast, tripping over her own story. She left out parts. She changed others. Her eyes darted toward the nearby table again. Before the manager could answer, someone from the group spoke. The voice was low and even not angry, just clear. He said they had seen what happened. He said everyone had heard the order that was given earlier. The words were not repeated, but the meaning hung in the air. The woman stiffened. Her mouth opened, then closed. She laughed once, short and forced. She said it was a joke. No one laughed with her. The waitress stood near the counter, listening. She felt exposed but also relieved. For the first time that night, she did not feel invisible. The manager swallowed and said he would call the police to sort things out. The woman protested quickly, saying it was unnecessary. She said she wanted to leave. Her chair scraped loudly as she stood again. The person who had earlier stood to threaten the waitress remained seated now, shoulders slumped. He avoided looking at anyone. The power he thought he had was gone, and he knew it. The manager picked up the phone anyway. His hands shook as he dialed. He explained the situation in careful words. He asked for help. While they waited, time moved strangely. Seconds felt like minutes. The waitress wiped a clean counter that did not need wiping. The group sipped their drinks slowly. The woman paced near her booth, arms crossed tight against her chest. One of the bikers stood and walked toward the restroom. As he passed the waitress, he spoke softly, just loud enough for her to hear. He said she had handled herself well. That was all. Then he kept walking. The words settled into her like warmth. She nodded slightly, unable to speak. Outside, red and blue lights flashed across the windows. The sound of a siren cut through the quiet. The woman flinched. The person with her cursed under his breath. 2 officers entered the diner. They looked around, taking in the scene. The manager explained again, pointing toward the booth. Several customers spoke up this time, backing up the story. The waitress answered questions clearly, without adding drama, just facts. The woman tried to interrupt, but one officer raised a hand gently and asked her to wait. Her face tightened. She crossed her arms again, tapping her foot. After a few minutes, the officers asked the woman and her companion to step outside. The woman protested, but her voice cracked. She gathered her things with shaking hands and followed them out. The door closed behind her, the bell ringing softly. The diner released a breath it felt like it had been holding all night. The waitress leaned against the counter for a moment. Her legs felt weak now that the danger had passed. The manager told her to take a break. She nodded and stepped into the back, splashing cold water on her face. She looked at herself in the mirror, eyes tired but steady. When she returned, the group was finishing their drinks. The manager waved off their bill, but they left cash on the table anyway. More than enough. As they stood to leave, one of them paused near the door. He turned back and spoke to the room, not loud, not threatening. He said people should treat workers with respect. Then he nodded once and walked out. The engines outside started again, one by one, then faded into the night. The diner felt different after they left. Quieter but lighter. The waitress finished her shift slowly, replaying the night in her mind. She knew she would not forget it anytime soon. When she stepped outside at the end of the night, the air felt cool and clean. She pulled her jacket tight and looked up at the dark sky. She had come to work expecting nothing more than another hard shift. Instead, she walked home knowing one important thing. She had not been alone. The next morning came slower than usual. The waitress woke up before her alarm, her mind already busy. The night replayed itself in pieces. The scrape of a chair, the roar outside, the quiet nod at the counter. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, letting the sounds fade. Then she got up because that was what she always did. She made a simple breakfast and sat at the small table near the window. The street outside was calm. People walked dogs. Cars passed without hurry. It felt strange that the world could look so normal after a night that had felt so heavy. She sipped her drink and tried to settle her thoughts. Part of her felt proud for staying calm. Another part felt tired, like something inside had been stretched too far. She reminded herself that fear did not mean weakness. It meant she cared about staying safe. When she arrived at the diner later that day, the manager met her at the door. He asked how she was feeling. His voice was softer than usual. She said she was okay, and this time it felt closer to the truth. Inside, the place looked the same, but it did not feel the same. A few regulars nodded at her with quiet smiles. One person told her she had handled herself well. Another said they were glad she was there. The words were small, but they mattered. During a slow moment, the manager explained what had happened after she left. The police had taken statements. There would be follow-up. The diner had decided to ban the woman and her companion. It was a simple decision, but it felt important. The waitress listened, hands resting on the counter. She had not expected anything to change. Hearing that it had made her chest feel lighter. Later that afternoon, the door opened again. The bell rang, and for a brief second, her body tensed. Then she relaxed. It was just customers coming in for lunch. A group sat at a booth near the window. They ordered politely. They thanked her when she brought their food. The normal rhythm of work returned, plate by plate, step by step. During her break, she stepped outside to get some air. The sun was warm. She leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. She thought about how close things had come to going very wrong. She also thought about how many people had watched and finally spoken up. She realized something then. Courage was not always loud. Sometimes it was staying steady. Sometimes it was saying what you saw when it mattered. As evening approached, a familiar sound drifted down the road. It was softer this time, not a roar, just a passing hum. A few motorcycles slowed near the diner, then continued on. They did not stop. They did not need to. She smiled to herself, surprised by the feeling. Not excitement, not fear, just gratitude. A week passed. The story spread, not as gossip, but as something people talked about quietly. Regulars told others what they had seen. The waitress did not correct anyone. She did not need to be the center of it. One afternoon, a woman about her mother's age came in and asked to speak with her. She said she had been there that night but had been too scared to say anything. She apologized, eyes wet. The waitress listened and placed a hand over hers. "It's okay," she said simply, and she meant it. Another day, a teenager left a note with the tip. It said, "Thank you for staying strong." The handwriting was messy, the message short. She folded the note and kept it in her pocket. The diner felt safer now. Not because danger was gone, but because people were more aware. The manager added a sign near the register, reminding customers to treat staff with respect. It was a small thing, but it sent a clear message. One night, as she wiped down tables near closing, she caught her reflection in the window. She looked the same, but something in her eyes had changed. There was more confidence there, quiet but real. She thought about how many times she had swallowed her feelings to keep the peace. She still believed in kindness, but she also believed in boundaries. As she locked up at the end of her shift, she stood for a moment under the diner lights. The road stretched out ahead, dark and open. She felt tired, but it was a good kind of tired. She knew there would be other hard days, other difficult people. Life did not suddenly become easy, but she also knew this. She had faced fear and stood her ground without raising her voice. She had been seen, and that knowledge stayed with her as she walked home, steady step by steady step. The weeks that followed brought a quiet shift in the diner. Nothing dramatic happened, yet everything felt different. The waitress noticed it in small ways. Customers said please more often. Voices stayed lower. People looked her in the eye when they spoke. Respect moved through the room like a soft current. She continued her routine, arriving early, tying her apron, checking the floor and the tables. The work was the same, but her posture had changed. She stood straighter now. When problems came up, She handled them with calm confidence instead of silent worry. One evening, a customer raised his voice over a wrong order. Before she could respond, another person nearby spoke up and reminded him to relax. The situation ended quickly. The waitress thanked them with a small smile. Moments like that stayed with her. The manager called a short staff meeting one afternoon. He talked about safety, about standing together, about speaking up when something felt wrong. No one mentioned the night directly, but everyone understood. The waitress listened, arms folded loosely, feeling part of something instead of alone inside it. After work that night, she walked home slower than usual. The air was cool. Streetlights reflected on the pavement. She thought about how easily things could have gone differently. She also thought about how many people had stepped in without force or noise. She realized something important. Strength did not always come from size or numbers. Sometimes it came from presence, from calm, from choosing not to look away. A few days later, the manager told her the police had closed the case. No charges were pressed, but warnings were issued. The woman and her companion were officially banned from the diner. The manager apologized again for what she had gone through. She accepted it, knowing he meant it. The waitress did not feel angry anymore. She felt resolved. Holding on to anger had always weighed her down. Letting it go felt like setting something heavy aside. One afternoon, a small group of writers stopped by again. Not the same night, not the same tension. Just passing through. They ordered food, talked quietly, laughed once or twice. They treated her like any other server, which somehow meant more. When they left, one of them gave a simple nod, the same one as before. She nodded back. No words were needed. Life outside work moved on too. She helped her sibling with homework at the kitchen table. She paid bills. She planned small things to look forward to, like a movie night or a walk in the park. The night at the diner became part of her story, not the whole thing. Still, sometimes the memory returned unexpectedly. A loud voice, a sudden movement. Her body reacted before her mind did. When that happened, she paused, breathed, reminded herself where she was. She began to understand her own strength better, not as something loud or dramatic, but as something steady that stayed with her. One weekend, the diner hosted a small community breakfast. Families came in. Kids laughed. The place felt warm and full. The waitress moved between tables easily, joking lightly with regulars. She caught the manager watching with a proud smile. During a quiet moment, an older customer told her she reminded him of someone who never backed down quietly. He meant it as praise. She thanked him and kept moving. Later that night, as she closed up, she noticed the sign near the register again. Respect our staff. Seemed simple, almost obvious. But she knew how often respect had to be reminded. She locked the door and stood for a moment, keys in hand. The diner lights glowed behind her. The road was quiet. She thought about the younger version of herself who had learned to stay silent to survive. She wished she could tell that version something. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to be safe. You are allowed to be respected. The thought stayed with her as she walked home. Steps even, shoulders relaxed. She did not know what the future held. None of them ever did. But she knew she would meet it standing, not shrinking. And that made all the difference. Time passed the way it always does, quietly and without asking permission. The night that once felt heavy slowly settled into memory. Not forgotten but understood. The waitress kept working at the diner, moving through her days with a calm rhythm that felt earned. One evening near closing, rain tapped softly against the windows. The diner was nearly empty. The lights reflected off the wet pavement outside, turning the road into a long ribbon of silver. She wiped down the counter and stacked clean cups, enjoying the peace. A customer stayed behind to finish a late meal. He thanked her for the service and said the place felt welcoming. She smiled and told him to drive safe. Small exchanges like that filled her more than tips ever could. As she locked the door, she paused, listening to the rain. The night felt gentle. She pulled her jacket tighter and walked home, thinking about how much had changed without the world noticing. She had learned to trust her instincts more. When something felt wrong, she did not ignore it anymore. When something felt right, she allowed herself to accept it without doubt. At home, she sat by the window and watched the rain slow. She thought about the people who had spoken up, the ones who had nodded in support, the ones who had simply treated her like a human being doing her job. All of it mattered. She realized that strength had grown in her quietly, like roots under the ground. No one could see it, but it held firm. A few days later, the manager asked if she wanted more hours or training for a different role. He said she had shown leadership. The words surprised her. She did not think of herself that way before. She asked for time to think. That night, she talked with her sibling over dinner. They laughed about small things. Then she mentioned the offer. Her sibling smiled wide and said she deserved it. The confidence in that answer made her chest warm. The following week, she accepted the training. It was not a big promotion. It was not life-changing. But it felt like progress. Felt like being seen. At the diner, she helped new staff learn the basics. She showed them how to stay calm when things got busy. She reminded them they were allowed to ask for help. She watched them grow more confident, just like she had. One afternoon, a tense moment began to rise with a difficult customer. Before it could turn ugly, she stepped in calmly, spoke clearly, and resolved it. The situation ended without shouting or fear. The room stayed steady. Later, she realized something. She had become the kind of presence that once made her feel safe. That thought stayed with her. Weeks turned into months. Seasons shifted. The diner saw new faces and lost old ones. Life moved forward as it always did. Sometimes motorcycles passed on the road outside. The sound no longer made her tense. It reminded her of a moment when fear stopped and balance returned. She never told the story for attention. She did not need to. It lived inside her, shaping how she walked through the world. One quiet morning, she arrived early and unlocked the door. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky in soft colors. She turned on the lights and stood for a moment in the empty room. She thought about how easily people could harm others with words and how easily they could protect with presence. She hoped the world would choose the second more often. As customers arrived, the day began like any other. Orders were taken, plates were served, conversations filled the air. And in the middle of it all stood someone who had once felt small, now grounded and steady. She did not need loud moments or dramatic endings. She had learned who she was, and that was enough.